Hi everyone, this is Byron Jacobs from DMB Poker, and I'm doing another of our series of author interviews. And today I'm delighted to be talking to Bernard Lee. Hi Bernard, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, I'm very good, thank you. And today we're going to be talking to Bernard specifically about his book, Poker Satellite Success. In fact, he's gone to a lot of trouble, and you'll see he's got it as the background on his Zoom screen. So thank you, Bernard, for putting it up there. That's great.
Not a problem.
Obviously, this book was published last year, but we were hoping to have promotions and stuff at the WSOP, but with COVID and everything, we're going to be pushing it. Turns out we ended up pushing it a lot more this year. So we're going to have a chat with Bernard about satellite play in general, and obviously specifically about his book. So first of all, Bernard, perhaps you could briefly just tell people a little bit who might not know so much, a little bit about yourself and your background and where your satellite expertise comes from, just kind of briefly.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Bernard Lee. I have been in the poker industry for almost 2 decades now. It's pretty amazing to think about it. I kind of first got my start playing in 2005, playing in the World Series main event. That was the year that Joe Hashim won, and was very fortunate to have a deep run in that. And I ended up finishing 13th out of 5,619 players. And from that, I actually qualified for that event via a satellite. It wasn't the first main event I had ever played. It was the first one at the WSOP, but I had played a couple of WPTs as well. And at the time, I think my wife would have kicked me out of the house if I put $10,000 down for an event. So, of course, I qualified via satellite for those events as well. So I definitely, to play in these larger events early on in my career, the only way to do it was via satellite. And I've had a media career in addition to playing poker. I've been fortunate to win about 10 titles, 2.5 million in my career. So I've done fairly well with regards to that, but also my media career, as well as I've written for ESPN, the Boston Herald, Card Player, Poker News, right now Metro West Daily News, which is a local Boston paper. And then I've also written 3 books, this one being my 3rd book. And I've been very fortunate to have a podcast / radio show for now. We're just starting to celebrate our 15th year anniversary.
That sounds great. You're obviously doing well on this.
Yeah, and as I said, throughout my entire career, satellites have been an integral part, even though I don't want to sound like I'm being boastful to say I can buy in for a $10,000 tournament. I have bought in for $10,000 tournaments. By the way, it is awful when you see that. Like, it's just heartbreaking to see that much money go across the table. But I have. But of course, I would rather not, right? I would rather play a satellite, put down a fraction of that cost, and be able to play in a significant event. But I think also, let's not look at it in such the grand scheme and like the main event is all, all encompassing. There are satellites, example, WSOP circuit, example, Run Good Poker Series, but there are satellites into events that are much less. Again, everyone's financial situation is different. And for some people, a $1,700 event, or at the World Series, a $1,500 event, these are still relatively expensive. And so to play in a satellite, to enter one of those events, there's no shame in that, no harm. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've done it. I've had a moment for a WSOP circuit. They're $1,700 buy-ins. I've played satellites to try to get into those. Why not? If you can play less, pay less to end up playing in a bigger event, I don't see anything wrong with it. And as I said, I can regularly buy into those $1,700 events, but if there is time or I feel like there's value, I will absolutely play in poker satellites.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, poker is all about generating EV, isn't it? So whatever you're doing with your poker time, if you're generating EV for expected value for yourself and it's positive, then that's good. And there's no reason why playing a satellite shouldn't be generating maybe even a lot of EV for you. So
Absolutely.
and for anyone else who understands them very well. Could you give us a little bit of an idea what the satellite landscape is like? I mean, obviously there'll be tons of stuff online, but if people are going to the WSOP, can they satellite into any event, or is it just specific event? Just give a little flavor of how that works.
Typically at the World Series, there are two satellites that are run, one in the afternoon, one at night, and they're for different values. Often the one at night is a $5,000. Again, this can change. So I don't want it to be people show up and be like, Bernard's completely wrong. It can change. Earlier on, 10 years ago, they were all $10,000 ones, but they've reduced, at least for a while, they were reducing them to $5,000. So you don't win a main event seat, but you win $5,000 in what they call lammers. So those lammers are now able to be used for anything. So if you win, if you put I think it's 550 or 560 or 570, something like that. There's obviously some that goes to the house, but then you ultimately win that 5,000 in lammers. Now you can use those for any event. So if you want to play in a $5,000 buy-in event, you can use it. If you want to play in $1,500 events, you can buy into 3 of them. You can do whatever makes sense for you. So it's not for a specific event. Ultimately, if you're looking to play in the main event, then obviously you've just gotten half of your main event buy-in. Often the day before any championship event, and how the World Series deems a championship event is a $10,000 event, they will have a satellite for that specific game. So for example, if they have a 7-card stud $10,000 championship on, I'm making up the day, so don't look at the calendar and say I'm wrong, June 28th, then on June 27th, that night at 8 o'clock, usually, they have a $1,000, $1,100 satellite for that next day. So you're not going to be able to play no limit hold'em. I know a lot of people show up and they're like, why are we playing stud? And then they explain why. So for me, I love deuce to 7 single draw. And so I will always mark on the calendar the night before to play in the $1,000 or $1,100 satellite for a couple of reasons. One, why not? And I've won the satellite twice. So why not? Why wouldn't you play in that? But also, too, because deuce to 7 single draw is such a rare game to be played. It's great. Satellites is still a tournament, right? So, I mean, it's a really great way. So there are also on tours, whether it's, as I mentioned, one example is WSOP circuit. A lot of times they'll have at like 9 o'clock a turbo satellite to get into that day's 400 or 560 or whatever event. So it'll be very nominal, $60, $70 to play in that event. The Run Good Poker Series, again, they'll have an event, their main event might be $575 and they may have like $100, $125 satellite to get into that event. So satellites are very proficient. Look on the schedules that are there. You'll see often they'll put it down there, how to play in a satellite. And of course, it'll probably be slightly different structures than what you're used to. Sometimes satellites don't even have antes, not even big blind antes. They just don't have antes. Everything is a little different. The time frame may be shorter. The blinds may escalate faster. So again, you just have to look at it. You can't assume anything. And then if you focus on playing in these satellites, sometimes you have some really good success and can really play big events for little money.
Okay, from some of the ones that you were talking about there, I was getting the impression most of them were like offering the satellite seat to like maybe 10% of the competitors. Is that fairly typical, or do you get satellites that are more speculative, where you maybe pay $100, $110 to try and get into a 10K main event type thing, but you've obviously got to be more fortunate to qualify from something like that? Or is the 10% ratio, is that the most typical one?
The 10% ratio is the most common one. However, I have seen a lot of different ones. 5 to 6 to 1 is very common. There is I've seen 20 to 1. That's about the biggest I've ever seen, like buy $500 to win a $10,000 seat. But typically 10 to 1 is very, very common. 5 to 1 is relatively common as well. And then sort of in between that as well. And a lot of, in my book, it actually kind of There are formulas in there that allow you to figure out exactly how many seats will be given out. And then from there, a lot of other formulas develop as well of what level will the satellite, kind of bubble burst, which is tremendous information if you think about it, because if you think that the bubble will burst at level, I'm making it up, 16, and it's level, 13, 14 or 15, you may slow down. But really, in essence, if you did the formula out and you realize it actually is going to break in level 18. So then as people are slowing down, that's a bad thing for them, but a great thing for you, because you can start playing a lot more hands. And even though they think they need to slow down because they're only one level away, they're really not one level away. They're like 3 levels away. And I actually have some examples, actually real life scenarios that actually happened at an event. I remember it specifically. We just knocked out so many people early, and we were only a few people away from ending the satellite. And so players were literally looking over their shoulder, looking at the other table. I raised something like 14, 15 hands in a row, and I built up so many chips. Once we got to the final table, I didn't even have to worry anymore. So I literally won the satellite because I knew what level we were going to finish. And sounds silly, but just that information alone literally got me to win the satellite.
I'm not experienced in playing satellites at all, but I would intuitively expect that you probably get quite a lot of kind of gambling type players in satellites, because they're maybe thinking they might like to take a shot at a 5K, and like you say, not necessarily be comfortable with that kind of level of buy-in, and they might maybe not be the most sophisticated players and maybe not understand all the nuances of strategy, some of which you've touched upon now. Is that a reasonable supposition to make about the general fields that you find in these events?
Yeah, I think the second part of your statement is correct, that a lot of them don't understand the strategies, but it's not often really like the gambling type per se. The gambling type per se just buys in because they feel like, let's go. Like, why not? Why not just give it a shot? A lot of times you'll have, in my opinion, kind of 2 split levels. You'll have the pros / experienced satellite players who are grinding to try to win satellites. And now sometimes winning satellites is like winning money. So for them to do that, they really grind at it. And so they understand the strategies. They understand to like hold off on some hands. But then you have other people who are like, I would love to play in this event tomorrow, but I just can't afford the buy-in. I just can't. And so I've got to take a chance. And those are the people, there are a lot of times when those people, they just don't understand that there's a difference between satellites and regular tournaments. And they'll play the satellite like it's a regular tournament.
Yeah.
And you'll see them make mistakes that you're like, you should never have done that. You should just never have done that. And that's life. They get knocked out, and they start getting upset about it. And they just don't understand what they did wrong. And if you're an experienced satellite player, you just realize they just made a huge mistake. Okay,
so moving on from that, obviously you've touched upon it there, but one of the interesting things about satellites is, like you say, the strategy does differ from tournaments, because the aim is only to get in, like to get the seat, the top 10% or something. So presumably there reach stages of play where you've got a lot of chips, and you could just kind of like fold your arms and sit there, and if you've worked out the formula correctly, you know that you have enough chips that you don't need to play another hand and things like that. So So do you think that's something that's quite difficult for people who just play tournaments to learn, because it's maybe counterintuitive a lot of the time, the kind of things that you have to do?
No, I don't think it's that counterintuitive. I mean, listen, poker is poker, right? So it's not like we're suddenly starting to learn how to play tiddlywinks. Like, it's still somewhat similar. But I will say that there are certain things. Listen, the number one thing that I talk all the time about poker satellites, I put it in the book, is that this is the number one goal: survival. That's it. You just got to survive. Like when you're playing in a poker tournament and you are playing on the bubble, the advantage of the bubble, especially for someone who has a decent number of chips, is everyone else is just trying to sneak into the money.
Sure.
And you're trying to get as many chips as possible, because once the bubble breaks, now those chips are ammunition so you can get to the final table and ultimately win the event. When you are on the bubble of a satellite, there is no second half of that statement. It is get through the bubble and it is over. It's done. So by you taking certain chances that other people would do on the bubble because like, I want to get more chips, that's a waste of time. Yeah. That's actually negative to what your goal is. If you have enough chips, it does not matter what hand you have, you fold. And I actually have a formula in there that shows, is there a certain point where you have enough chips and you literally can, as jokingly say, go up to your room, please call me when the tournament's over, right? And it's not a common occurrence, but it has happened more than a handful of times in my career where I've done the math out and I'm like, I don't have to play another hand. Yeah, I literally don't have to play another hand, and I will play it accordingly. And I don't have any fears of doing that. People will now say right now, yeah, but that's ridiculous. If you get aces, you got to play. Okay, that's what you want to say. I'm going to give you, and I explain this. I actually wrote a column on ESPN on when you should muck aces pre-flop, and it is a specific situation in satellite. It was at the time, and still probably is, the most commented poker column on ESPN.com history. There were thousands of comments saying anywhere from what an idiot to wow, didn't ever really think about this. And then about a year later, I was playing in a satellite in Atlantic City, and wouldn't you know, the exact situation showed up. And isn't it beautiful that life can actually imitate, not art, a column? The aces got knocked out on the bubble.
Okay.
He wasn't a short stack, by the way. He actually had more chips than I did. And at the other table, there were 3 players that didn't have enough chips to go one orbit. And he went up against queens. And as you know what the story is going to be, right on the river, ba-boom. So there are times where it makes sense, because now people are going to say, like, that's ridiculous. You can never fold aces. What is the percent that you will win aces pre-flop against any random hand? It's about 80%. 80% is not 100%. So if you have an above average stack, 3 players at the other table can't go around one orbit, and you are 5th out of 17 players, you probably have a 99.5, if not a 99.8% chance that you're going to get your seat. So I think if I know math right, 99.8 is greater than 80%. So why are you playing aces? Just because you have to play aces? No, you don't. I have to win my seat. And so mathematically, if it is better to fold there, because as long as I just fold away, I'm going to get my seat 99.8% of the time, then fold it. And so, again, these are some of the things. And so I think some of the things that are unique about this book, of course, it will have strategy. It will talk about early stages, middle stages, late stages, on the bubble. It'll even talk about prior to the start of the tournament, which I think is a very unique thing. People don't talk about what you do before. But the thing that a lot of people have talked about this book are the last 4 chapters, which I really think are the actual unique aspects of this book that really set it apart. One of the chapters is just other scenarios, whether it's online scenarios or there's also tournaments called survivor tournaments. We talk about folding aces pre-flop. Okay, so that's one unique one. Another one is, how do you make deals? People are like, deals? What are you talking about, deals? This is a satellite. There are a lot of deals made in the satellite. I know that at the World Series, when you get to level 12, there's a break. You are always right near or on the bubble at that level. That break, I always know that I wait before I start talking deal discussions until that moment. Because why? Is because now people are thinking about it. They're walking around. They're looking at everyone's chips. Oh, wow, maybe I'm not as big of a stack as I thought I was, et cetera, et cetera. It makes people think like, boy, it would stink to get knocked out right here. So how do you make deals? How do you approach deals? How do you talk about deals? Because who thinks about deals in satellites? And so I think it's a really nice section. The last two sections that I really find incredibly valuable, and for people who don't know and people who are thinking like, didn't Bernard already write something on poker satellites? When Jonathan Little wrote a book about 5-6 years ago about excelling no limit hold'em, about 15 or 16 people wrote a chapter. It was kind of his Doyle Brunson, right? His
exactly.
System,
It was,
right?
it was one of our books, yeah.
Right, and it was his super system. And Jonathan was very kind to ask me, would you write a section? And at that time, I had been presenting a lot on several topics, but one of them was satellites. And I said, well, what about satellites? He goes, oh, that'd be great. No one's suggested that. And so I wrote it. And I had heard from you, I'd heard from Dan, and in all honesty, I'd heard from a lot of fans. I signed that chapter more times than I can count. And it just, people come up to me and they say, I love this section, etc. And then both of you approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in writing a full book on it, not just this? Well, once you asked that, these were the first two chapters that I wrote, because I had already started writing them when I wrote the chapter, but the chapter had a limited number of words, right? So the first two chapters that I immediately went to was practice examples. So there are about 4 examples in there that say, hey, how do you understand the short stack strategy formula that I have? How many people or entries will it be for one seat? How do you calculate if you have enough chips to earn a seat and don't have to play another hand? And then the last chapter are 8 real life scenarios that I lived. I didn't make them up. These are scenarios that actually happened in satellites, whether for WSOP, WPT, Run Good Poker Series. And the scenario happened based off of a lot of the strategies that I had and what I did. So it was basically, it sets up the situation, then it stops and says, well, what would you do? Now that I've set up this situation, what would you do in this scenario? And then I tell you what happened. And by the way, sometimes it wasn't good news for Bernard Lee. Sometimes it was bad news. Sometimes I made a mistake. Sometimes I could have done something different to get me that seat, and I lost the seat. So this isn't all success stories, but in failure, you learn. And then the next section will be what I learned from this, right? So if I failed, what I learned. If I succeeded, also what I learned. And so it's like you just played in 8 different satellites, real turbo, reduced version, because you don't play every single hand, but you go through these 8 scenarios and you don't have to live the failures like I did. And now you understand, oh, if that situation ever happens again, I'll know what to do, because I remember Bernard talked to me about it. Even if it doesn't play out the exact same way mine is, at least you have the experience of what I did and you can play off of that. And I really believe that, as much as this, of course, I think that if you buy the book, the satellite strategy alone obviously is worth it. But what really takes this book over the edge are those few extra chapters that I don't think any book out there has it. Not only for any scenarios in satellite, they don't have something like this. And I think that that's really valuable.
Okay, that's great, and that's a very good reason for people to want to get hold of the book, especially with the WSOP coming up. Now, you're obviously a very experienced satellite player.
Right.
People, when they play tournaments, they like to talk a lot about their ROI on a tournament. How much they expect to get back for every kind of entry fee they play. What's your kind of hunch with satellites? I mean, if you're paying like a 1K to try and get into a 10K, so in principle you should succeed 10% of the time if the skill was all shared around. Now, you or someone similar to you as a sophisticated satellite player who understands them well, would you expect to maybe qualify like maybe, I don't know, 2 times out of 10, 1.5 times out of 10? I mean, what's your sort of feel for a result like that? How good can your ROI be?
I've never done the exact math out, but for someone to say like, oh, I expect to win 40% of the time, you're fooling yourself. That's just not going to happen, right? But I would say anywhere from 1/6 of the time to maybe I wouldn't say 1/5. I think that's just tough. You know what I mean? Like,
because that would be like 100%, wouldn't it? Because you're getting back twice.
So if I did it 1/6 of the time, it'd be basically 16%. So one out of every 6, I get it, right? If you did a 5th, it would be 20%. If it would be 4th, it'd be 25%. So like, I think that 25% is a little bit too much. I do.
Okay.
I think 1 out of every 4, I think, is asking a little bit too much. But to say I get 1 in every 6, 1 in every 7, I don't think that that's outrageous.
Well, that's still a very good return because you're paying, say, 1K, and you're getting the value you're getting is like 1.6K or 1.7. So you're getting like $1,600, $1,700 for your $1,000 investment. So that, I mean, I don't think many people are going to get that in a tournament unless they're very good players.
I've had, so I have to tell you, I specifically remember one summer. I did not have a good summer. I think I cashed in only 1 or 2, and they were both min cashes at the World Series. But I won 3 satellites, 1 live, and this shows you how far back it was, but 2 online, and they were all 10Ks. Oh, so I ended up winning money during the summer, even though technically it shows nowhere that I won money. But I won, like, and it was hysterical because as bad as it ran during the events, that's how well I ran during the satellites. I remember it. I was rooming with a buddy and played in a 1500 whatever, got knocked out early, came up to the room, and he was sitting there online playing. I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, there's a 10K satellite for blah, blah, blah." And for the main event, obviously for the World Series. And I was like, "Oh, well, I got nothing to do. I might as well log on and play too." Then, you know, like double up. He gets knocked out, right? And he's like, "I'm going to go get something to eat." I'm like, "Okay, great." And then he comes back and he goes, "You're still in?" I go, "I'm like 11th and they're giving away like 50 seats. I've got my seat." And he just was like, "Didn't you win one the other day?" I go, I mean, so, you know, they come in a bunch of, you know, that's just the volatility of tournaments. But
sure,
sometimes satellites can really, really save you. I mean, it's unbelievable. You know, way back when at Foxwood, this is almost 20 years ago. At Foxwoods, you buy a $10,000 event, the first one you get the seat. The next one you get cash, right? I remember that. I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is unbelievable." Like, so, you know, it's a tremendous, there's a lot of value that comes out of satellites if you have it. And sometimes, like I said, with the deuce to 7, like say, for example, I will set aside time to do it. There will be times at the World Series where I just know there are 2 or 3 days where, for better or worse, they're Omaha days. I'm not an Omaha player. I know how to play. I'm fairly proficient if you compare me to the entire world. But if you go to the World Series, there are players who are just going to be them. I'm negative EV. I'm just going to admit it. So why do it, right? Especially PLO. That's just not my game. And I do not have the interest to learn it. I'd rather learn and know more about deuce to 7, triple draw, or something like that. So if there are days like that, and I'll probably go play golf or whatever, but at 8 o'clock at night, if I have nothing to do the next day, I'll look at the schedule. And if there's a $500 satellite, and I really scout it too. If there's 8 players, I'm not going to play in it. That's just a waste of my time. Now you have to literally win. The beauty of satellites is you never have to win. 60 players, 1 out of 10, you have to get to the final 6.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that's easy, but that's a hell of a lot easier than having to win. And so people are like, "Yeah, but if there's, you know, 17 players, you only have to get through 16 players." That's not what it is. You don't have to get through 16 players. You have to get to heads up.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if there's 60 players, yes, you have to get through 54 players, but you only have to get down to 6-handed. Getting down to 6, 7, 8-handed is very different than getting down to 2, 3, 4-handed.
Yeah,
Right?
and also I would imagine that for someone who wants to play a lot of poker and they like playing the kind of tournaments rather than cash, you can, if you only play tournaments, you can, as we all know, have these incredibly barren periods where you can go months, years, and things just don't go your way, and your graph is just awful. It's just like, you know, falling off a cliff slowly or something. But from what you're saying about satellites, I mean, you've only got to like finish in the top 10%. So even when it's going badly, it's not like you. I mean, when you're playing a tournament, you're trying to get to the final table of the last 3. So you need to, you know, get in the top. If there's 500 players, you need to be one of the top 4 or 5. That's not going to happen that often. But with satellites, just the 10%, you're going to hit that pretty frequently, I would have thought. And maybe, and being a skillful player, it's going to help your graph, you know, your results to stay buoyant, which must be psychologically quite good as well.
Yeah. And so you think about just what you just said. when I said I had a very bad World Series, I think I cashed in 2 of maybe 11, 12 events, right? So it's not horrible. It's 1 out of 6. But when they're both min cashes, I'm not making money, right? But I said I played in, I think it was 4 satellites that summer. I cashed in 3 of them. Okay, so like if we add the satellites to that equation, right? So I cashed in 2 of 12. So now it's 5 of 16. Okay, it's a good number, but they were all min cashes because winning a satellite is a min cash. But I made money that summer.
Yeah.
Because of a min cash, 3 min cashes, right? So like if you min cash, you basically make the money as if you made the final table, right? You make 10 times. And a lot of times, if you look at it, 9th place, maybe 10 times your buy-in or something along those lines, right? Like I know if you're playing in the main event, it's a completely different story, right? I mean, like that's $100,000, whatever. That's fine, $1 million. But like normal events, 400 or 500 players, 1,000 players, you look at the main 9th place, about 10 times, maybe 15, whatever. But it's really like you made the final table.
Sure. Anyway, so with WSOP coming up, we could strongly suggest that players zero in on some of the satellite tournaments, get a hold of a copy of Bernard's book, which will give you all the formulas, all the instruction, all the details that you need. And there's also sections, as Bernard explained earlier on, where you can test yourself and make sure you understand all the themes, all the strategies, all the ideas before you even sit at the table. So Bernard Lee, thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate your time, and good luck at the WSOP this year.
I appreciate. I also want to mention one other thing that DMB is helping out with as well. That Robbie Straczynski at Card Player Lifestyle will be having a mixed game festival at Resorts, Las Vegas, during the week of June 12th through the 16th. I will be there on June 13th at 11 a.m. and I'll be signing copies of my book. So if you are interested, come over. I'll sign it. I'll personally sign it for you. We can discuss satellite strategy if you'd like. So I'll be there for a while. So definitely come by, pick up a copy, and I'll be signing the book there.
Brilliant. Bernard, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And as I said, good luck this year. And we look forward to the signing.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Bernard.
Byron. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.